All right. So we are on chapter 54 of the Imitation of Christ. And it's in the book 3 called The Interior Conversation. And this one is called On the Opposition Between Nature and Grace. Now, when Christians say nature, they mean the nature of the fallen. So they don't, and even created things, because all created things, come come into being and are the material world. They're not of the spiritual nature. And so it's the fruits of the spirit that we're after, not the fruits of materialism, ideally. So he starts the chapter today with Christ speaking. Christ, my child, carefully observe the actions of nature and grace, for both move in opposite directions and in such subtle ways as to be indistinguishable except by the spiritually enlightened. All human beings long for goodness and pretend that there is some good in what they say or do. That is why many are deceived by an apparent goodness. This is interesting that he's countering nature and grace. Grace is the things that take the mind higher, and nature is the things that take the mind lower, according to this paradigm. And that it can only be distinguished by the spiritually enlightened. And when they say enlightened, they're not talking about the same enlightened that Vedanta would be talking about. Spiritual enlightenment means just someone who's spiritually wise, someone who's well versed in the scriptures, is someone who would be spiritually enlightened. All human beings long after goodness and pretend there's some good in what we're doing, right? That's how the murderer murders. All of us arrange our inner thought worlds to justify what we're doing. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. If we couldn't justify it or hadn't justified it in some strange way, we wouldn't have committed that act, whatever that act may be. And so this is this is the danger, and the reason that we do practice every day, and the reason that we spend time with the scriptures, and the reason that it's beneficial to be in touch with your guru. You shouldn't make any changes to your practices without a conversation with your guru, because you may be making wrong choices. When we act without teacher, without guru, it's motivated by egoism. And if we have our ego as our teacher, that can cause a lot of troubles, because what is pleasant may not be what is good for us. And so that's what he's saying here. Do not be deceived by an apparent goodness, right? An apparent goodness would be a relative goodness. So it's like, the choice between two evils, and you think one is good and the other one's more evil somehow. Nature indeed is wily and betrays many through its deceits and crafty ways, and has always the self as its end. On the other hand, grace walks with simplicity, turning aside from all that appears evil. It employs no deceits, but does all unaffectedly, purely for God, in whom it rests. All right, so we see that the idea of the nature is that there's always a level of deceit. There's always a promise that it can't fulfill. And that's the danger of desires in this world, is that they are promises that can't be fulfilled, right? They can't give what they deliver. That was Eve's problem with the fruit, that it was beautiful, yes. That it looked like it would be good to have, okay. That it would give her wisdom and make her like God, no. That's not what it did. That's not what it does. And so that's the point behind our discernment, is to see things with clarity, and why we keep one hand on the scriptures while we do that discerning, in order to have that wisdom, to not get caught in these things. Whereas grace, turns aside from anything that appears selfish, anything that appears hurtful, or it gets a little bit suspicious of things that are pleasant, in light of viewing to find out whether they're good, meaning, are they going to build me up and take me forward toward the divine, or are they going to pretend to make me happy and drag me farther into body ID or mind ID, where we'd get stuck in those rounds. Nature dies hard and is not easily overcome or repressed. Never under its own accord will it be subject to obedience. Right? Anytime that you give power to your vices, it simply will not come under control. I mean, even when you say no, it will sit there and argue with you. It has to be withdrawn from. You can't reason your way through it. You discern and you do your best to see with clarity. But the no has to come through taking refuge in Mother. If you just sit there saying no, the problem with doing that is you keep your eyes on the thing. Even if you're saying no to it, it's in your awareness. It sits in your mind. And it will just sit there, constantly sort of just twisting your hair around its finger, keeping your attention. So really the best way to deal with these temptations when they come to us is to instantly turn to Mother and say, Mother, I can't do anything. And you said that it is your responsibility to keep me, to clean me up, to bring me home. So I take refuge in you. And then you focus on Mother as you take refuge. So when you turn and say, I take refuge, you're not keeping your mind or not even placing any of your mind. You don't name it even. You turn from it and you turn to Mother and you say, I take refuge in you. And you keep your mind on the divine. You don't let it stay focused or even think about this pretend battle that's going on. There is no battle. There's only you inside. So there's nothing to fight. It's only you needing to stay true to yourself, right? Not to violate your nature of love and wisdom. And so you turn to Mother and you just lay there in front of Mother. You say, I can't do this. I can't win this. And you surrender it to Mother's feet and you say, I take refuge in you. And you just really keep that thought of Mother in your mind and you go forward. And I found that to be the most effective way for dealing with these wily desires that we have, that the mind conjures up with false promises of finding happiness or finding fulfillment or, finding endless pleasure. But grace studies how to be mortified to both the world and the flesh, right? It's always looking for ways to be free, to not be a slave to the needs and demands of the body and the needs and demands of the mind. It was one of the surprising things. It was surprising to me anyway, and I probably shouldn't have been. But when I was doing that exercise, and I think I'll probably always be doing it to some extent, but the exercise of going inside and really becoming familiar with the boundaries and space of body and the boundaries and space of mind within myself when I go into the inner world. And the thing that was surprising to me was realizing and seeing quite clearly that no desire arises from the viewer, from the self, from that who is looking for truth, that self in us. No desires arise from there. The desires always arise from either body or mind. And, to be able to pull out of them, you don't stay identified with them and then fight against the desires. You have to clip them off by withdrawing identity. It's like, yes, the mind wants to have a beer. I'm not the mind. So it doesn't matter to me what it wants at this moment. So you clip it off like that. You don't argue with it. You don't step into it as if it's you and argue with its wilies. And I'm also not saying you can't have that glass of beer, but I'm just saying that you should go be aware that if you're in a state of desire, it's not the self that's looking for it. It's not you that's looking for it. You, as the observer, have no desire. You're content to sit and watch. And you've been sitting and watching for thousands of years, in a content state, in a meditative state. And it's important to know that when you think that you're having a difficult meditation, because this meditation it doesn't even measure on your meditation. You have been meditating in silence sitting patiently as the self, looking at the body and looking at the mind of one or another for thousands of years, watching one body come, one body go, one body come, one body go. You just haven't realized the self yet. You're still associated with those bodies as they come and go. But meditation is natural to us, just like we demonstrated that absolute renunciation is natural to us, natural and easy. That we do it when we slide into dream, we renounce this world completely, and when we slide back into the waking state, we renounce the dream world completely, with hardly even a memory of the two. And we do it effortlessly. It's so easy to leave everything behind. When you enter into that dream at night, you leave your family, your work, your memories, your stories, your hopes, your dreams, everything. And so these are evidences that our true nature is divine, that we are excellent meditators. We've really, in truth, done nothing but meditate for thousands of years, and we're excellent renouncers. That we're able to just completely leave one reality and move into the next with a snap, no problem at all. And so to remember that when the ego tries to make up those stories, oh, I can't meditate. Oh, my mind is so noisy. Oh, this or that. Because the mind may be noisy, but you are not. That's why you know the mind is noisy. You see, if you were both noisy, you wouldn't know you had a noisy mind. It would just be a cacophony in there. But it's not a cacophony in there. You are watching a noisy mind, and you know that it's noisy because you, the watcher, are in pure silence. You're in that holy silence, the silence of pure potential, of pure and infinite potential. And so so Grace studies how to be mortified to both the world and the flesh, desires to be overcome and under obedience, and seeks not its own liberty, nor to dominate any creature. Grace always wants to live under God's direction, and for his sake to place itself humbly under every human creature. Right? So grace is just that which moves us toward the divine. It gives us permission to move toward the divine. The ego is always coming up with reasons why you can't. That's one of its jobs because it wants to stay in charge. An egotistical person always wants to be the subject of the conversation, always wants to have the most important thing to say, always wants to be, given first place in line. It's just the nature of the ego to push us farther and farther away from the awareness of our divine nature, for the very reason that's being described here, that your divine nature is doing the opposite. That's the voice of conscience. It's the pain of wrongdoing, the suffering of selfishness, and suffering for the desires that arise from body and mind all the time. Nature always looks to its own advantage. That's egoism, right? So it's always looking for its own advantage, considering what gain it can derive from another. Right? I saw this one time. I was in LA, and I knew this guy who was a director, a film director. He had directed several documentaries that had done rather well, and I introduced him to a woman who was an artist for the Cirque du Soleil, and they were both active in their careers. And when I introduced the two of them, I watched the most interesting thing happen. I saw a purely LA conversation unfold, because the first part of the conversation was them sort of just dropping names of who they had worked with and what projects they had done together. And I could see that was an exercise to kind of see are you in my league? Am I in your league? And do you have context that might be interesting or helpful to me? And do I have context that might be interesting or helpful to you? I could see that whole game unfold. And I sat there and realized the value of being a monk. I realized why I could be friends with both of these people, because I offered no competition. I had nothing to gain from them. And there's safety in that, there's safety in that for them and for me. And it was quite lovely because when I saw the two of them going back and forth like that, I was like, oh my God, wow, that's intense. That's the way it's put together, the way that it works. And I thought, wow, what a spooky thing. You can feel the gentleness of your heart kind of quiver, like, ooh, ah, that's such a cold way of existing, such a cold way of living. But nature, ego, always looks for its own advantage, considering what gain it can derive from another. But grace is not concerned with its own profit, but with what may benefit others. This is the beautiful thing about our nature, is that it naturally nurtures others. You see that in the incarnations when they come, because the only difference between the incarnation and us is that lack of egoism. They take just enough egoism to hold a body, and that's it. And we see how everything they do is for the benefit of other people. In our class on Holy Mother on Monday nights, we see that her whole world was a constant whirling of her making sure that everybody was getting what they needed, the medicines they needed, the health care they needed, the attention that they needed, and that she was always sending her workers around. It's something I'm always going to remember whenever I think of the life of Holy Mother, because she doesn't do much talking about philosophy. She doesn't do much talking about the paths of spirituality or the metaphysics of Vedanta. She's very, very, very busy living it. And you have to go and observe her life to learn these things. She doesn't tell you about them. I used to tell people that if you want to learn a lesson on renunciation from Holy Mother, if you search for renunciation and Holy Mother, you won't get any hits in Google. She doesn't talk about it, right? But if you want to learn about renunciation, you search for chapatis, and you start to see how much Mother was constantly cooking, constantly caring for the devotees. She knew who would eat what and how much, and who liked what and who didn't like other things. She kept track of all of that, was always just very concerned that everybody that came within her sphere was well fed, was taken care of, and stayed healthy. And her reach was really wide. It was between Calcutta, Kolpara, and Jairambati, and Karmarpur as well. And so she had this eye that was constantly scanning everyone that she knew for anything that she could do to be helpful. Nature looks for honor and respect, right? It seeks it out and gets offended if it doesn't get its fair share, what it considers its fair share. You go to a dinner and they put you in the second to the highest seat, which is why Jesus says, if you ever are going to one of those dinners, sit in the lowliest place, sit in the most humble chair, and let the host move you up, rather than assuming the most honorable chair and then being asked to move down. So Jesus says, always place yourself in that humble position. And so understand, these are great markers. If you're ever wondering if you're being motivated by love or by the ego, these are the distinctions. Grace refers all honor and reverence to God, right? Because to associate reverence or honor to ourselves simply sprouts the ego. So we don't take any credit to ourselves, and that's not to say that that some wouldn't be deserved or that some hasn't been earned, but it is to say that that's beside the point, because it is God in us that has inspired that goodness, and so we place it at the Mother's feet or at God's feet, Jesus's feet. That it is His presence and His inspiration and His example that has taught us what is good and has us allowed us to transcend our fallen nature, to return to the garden. Nature fears rebukes and contempt, right? So it's afraid of correction. It avoids it. Grace is happy to suffer them for the name of Jesus. Grace is glad to find out that it can get better. Glad to find out how it can get better. Glad to find out that it was inadvertently wrong, and so that it can be raised up. It can move into a transcendence. So it loves being corrected. It loves being challenged by the scriptures. It's pleasing to it to find out its errors and to have the grace that allows it to move through it and overcome it. Nature craves ease and idleness, right? Just laying around doing nothing, couch potatoing. That's what ego enjoys. It wants that time for itself and doesn't want to spend it on anything. But grace cannot be idle and gladly embraces toil. You know, in the sense that it's always aware of some way that it can be of help or of service, and so it does it. Grace cannot be idle. Well, we'll take that, I guess. It can't be lazy. Let's put it that way. It can't be inert, full of inertia. Nature surrounds itself with rare and costly things and looks down upon what is coarse and cheap. Grace takes joy in humble and simple things, does not disdain hard things, nor refuses to be clad in poor clothing. Nature focuses its attention on worldly matters. It is elated by material gains. It is downcast by losses, and it is cut to the quick by a sharp word. Grace is intent upon things eternal, is not worried by the loss of things, nor grieved by the unkind word, for its treasure and joy are in heaven, where nothing is lost. Right, so it's about a matter of focus there. The egoism is always focused on getting its share, on grabbing. I had that dream about the sand piles. Ego is always collecting the sand, right, and trying to own it, trying to make its own pile. And so in this dream, there were thousands of these people trying to build the highest sand pile they could on the beach, and it was a beach of infinite sand. So there was no point to it whatsoever. And that's the way the ego is. We have an infinite amount of love, but we are so miserly with giving that love. We have lots of demands on others for the reception of our love. If we're going to love them, they got to call us and invite us to their party too. If we're going to love them, they have to say nice things about us behind our back, right? If we're going to be nice to them and be friends, then they have to include me in their birthday party. That's how it is. But grace is kind and unselfish, avoids self-interest, is content with little, and rightly judges that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Right? So you see how this is lining up exactly with what Vivekananda is telling us. The only two measures of spiritual life are you unselfish and are you loving? Those are the only two questions from which you can measure your spiritual life. Nature is inclined to seek creatures, to the love of its own flesh, to idle pastimes and to unnecessary running about. Grace draws people toward the love of God and virtuous living, renounces all created things, right? All things that change, or all created things. Flees the world, right? The world of the material, the world of body and mind. Despises the lusts of the flesh, restrains all useless wanderings, and avoids as much as possible appearing in public. Nature gladly receives exterior comfort to gratify the senses. Grace seeks comfort only in God, finding delight in the sovereign good beyond all things visible. Nature does everything for personal profit, never doing any work for nothing, but always looking for repayment, at least in equal amount, if not better, or else for praise and favor, and longs to have its deeds and its words highly valued, right? I feel this all the time, you guys. This is always a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous thing for me, And sometimes I win and sometimes I don't. But boy, I tell you, the nag of it, the danger of it is always there. If you go and you You give a lecture and it goes well. Boy, the ego is waiting right there with its begging bowl to fill it up with compliments and assurances and whatnot. The thing about that is that becomes the point, because you never get enough of those things if you focus on them, if they become your measure of value, right? Because our nature is of infinite value. And if we're trying to mimic that in the finite world, we're going to have to get an infinite amount of praise for it. And it's not going to happen, right? So nature does everything for personal profit, never doing any work for nothing, but always looking for repayment, at least an equal amount, if not better, or else for praise and favor, and longs to have its deeds and words highly valued. On the other hand, grace seeks no temporal reward, nor any other compensation in payment, but only God himself. Grace will have no more of the necessities of life than that which serves to obtain everlasting life. Right? It's that knowing what the point of being here is. And that grace looks for things that heal, not for things that distract. The ego is always looking for distraction because it's based on a lie and it does not actually exist. So it's always looking for distraction from that truth, and always looking to keep the body-mind busy, working on gathering things to prove its existence. It's because egoism is always insecure. Always insecure. Nature enjoys having a crowd of relatives and friends, prides itself on the family tree and distinguished background. Nature flatters the rich and caters to those in power, and approves those who share the same opinions as itself. But grace behaves differently, for it loves even its enemies, and does not boast of having a large circle of friends. It cares not for rank or birth, unless joined with greater virtue. It favors the poor rather than the rich, and has more in common with the simple and the innocent than with the influential. It rejoices with the truthful and not with liars. It encourages the good to be zealous, to aim higher, and by exercise of virtues to become more like Christ our Lord. As soon as trouble and want appear, nature is quick to complain. Grace gladly bears poverty with constancy. Right? So you're getting a good picture here. He's really drawing out all the aspects of selfishness, all the aspects of self-centered thinking. And the ego, which is based on body-mind, can't help it. That's all that it wants. It wants the body to be fed first and with the best. It wants the mind nurtured and pampered, respected, and paid homage to by everyone else. And it wants to keep a constant flow of enjoyment. So we use the body for that until the body is completely exhausted of all of the efforts for all of the various types of enjoyments that the ego wants to collect and hold on to. Nature refers all things to itself, and all its striving is for itself. But grace refers all things back to God, who is their source. Grace is not presumptuous and attributes no good to itself. Neither does grace argue or prefer its own opinions, but submits to eternal wisdom. Nature wants to know secrets and is avid for news, wants to appear in public and to try new things. It likes to be noticed and to do sensational things to win approval. Grace cares nothing for the novel or curious, for it knows that all this springs from our old corruption, since there is nothing new or lasting upon the earth. Grace teaches us to control our senses, to shun all vain pleasure and outward show, and to humbly hide anything that might win human admiration. In all knowledge and in all actions, grace seeks not only spiritual profit, but above all, the praise and the honor of God, that he may be blessed in his gifts, which he freely bestows through his love. This grace is a supernatural light and a special gift of God. It is the proper mark of the elect and a pledge of eternal salvation. It lifts a person above the things of the earth to the love of heavenly things, making a spiritual person of a worldling. The more nature is kept down and overcome, the more grace fills the human soul, and through new daily visitations, the soul is formed more and more to the image of God. Right? So that's the nature of the soul is the image of God, but it's our forgetfulness that has kept us from being able to express it. And in that forgetfulness, we form attachments, reach out, trying to identify with something. Since we have forgotten our nature, we try and find it again. But when we go looking for it, we don't do it through negation. We go looking for it through the senses. And so it has to be in front of our awareness instead of behind our awareness. And that's why nothing that we find can give us that joy, can give us that fulfillment, because it simply isn't there. It's a phantom, like all the things of the senses. Nothing is what it is. Everything is a constant shifting to something else. That's the nature of the material world. The ego lies about it. It lies through distraction, right? When you're 20, you really just have the idea you are going to be around forever. And when you start turning 30, everybody, at 30, people start exercising and start doing their special facial cares and, exploring ways that to keep their wrinkles off their face and to stay young. And then you get to 45, and then you start doing the same things for medical reasons. You can't eat this, you shouldn't touch that, right? And it's not until you get, I think it's probably not until you get probably to 65 or 70 where it's just too hard to ignore. But I've seen some people, oh my gosh, there was one guy in San Francisco, oh my gosh, what a spectacle he was. He must have been, he looked 90, he looked 85 or 90, and he would still wear those tight black leather pants and like a white muscle shirt, and everything was sagging everywhere. And he still had a very straggly ponytail that had probably 8 hairs that actually made it through the ponytail ring in the back. And he'd go around and he was always on the hunt, just always on the hunt, making eyes at everybody on the street. It was such a strange vision. And I'm sure it's one that Mother gave to me to be like, see, this is the nature of this life. If you do not learn through discernment and you do not renounce to turn your life toward, things of the spirit, things of love, things of grace, this is where it goes. It becomes infinitely hungry ghosts is what the Asian culture calls it. The hungry ghosts, people whose eyes, Ramakrishna says the eyes of a lusty person are big and round like a bull's, because they're always looking, always have an appetite for pleasure, just looking everywhere. So you see, this is the difference, and this is vidya and avidya, light and darkness. Darkness leads us into confusion by following the lies of body mind that will always justify anything that you're doing to be okay, to be a good thing, to be ultimately a good thing. And then you've got the self, which is just a very simple being, is always looking to serve, always looking to care, always looking to give itself, because it knows itself to have an infinite flow, and it wants to share that flow. It wants that flow to go everywhere. And this is what gives birth to that idea that time is money. Time is love, not money. That in our culture, we live squarely under that idea that time is money. And that's why we don't get nice things. You go to Russia and look at their subway stations. My gosh, they're palaces, every single one of them. because of communism, money gets spent on the infrastructure for the common good in its ideal. Now, the problem is that it also gets abused and becomes a matter of privilege. But in general, it's like that. And I going to Europe, and I walking around Zurich, and just looking at the art in the architecture everywhere, and the sculptures and the designs. People were not doing that for money, because people could never pay you for those things. Those things come beyond price. They become gifts to society by the builders, gifts to humanity. I have to build a building, and it's going to be downtown. And if you're motivated by love, you're like, what can I give to the community? What can I give to the people in this town? How can I just embellish this for them and express my appreciation of them and my love for this town and whatnot, right? And you can make beautiful things, but if you do it for profit, you're just going to get these planned communities with stamped out houses, all the same, one after another, all painted the same color, one after the other. No thought about the people who are going to live there. Put a porch on the front that's just big enough to be the idea of a porch, but would never be never wide enough or never comfortable enough to actually have somebody sit on it. Which is why you walk through the suburbs and you see beautiful front porches everywhere, all set up to be sat in. You will never see anybody sitting in them, right? Because nothing was made for the humans, and so nothing is inviting. Nothing pulls you into it. And this is the danger of becoming greedy. We see it all around us right now. We have a plague of greed that we have to work with in the country. We're coming to the point where everything is a matter of monopolies. They no longer have to serve you to get your money, because they are the only place for you to go. And so when that starts happening, I couldn't get checked in for my flight today. So I called JetBlue. They wanted to charge me $50 to talk to an agent. They wanted to charge me $50 to talk to an agent. I had to convince them that the trouble was not with. They said that because I had booked my flight on Expedia, it was Expedia's responsibility, and if they were going to fix it, it would cost $50. And I said, but this is your confirmation number to check in for your flight. I said, this has nothing to do with Expedia, and I'm not paying you $50 to fix a problem that exists on your side of the fence caused by you. I was justified in the end. I didn't have to pay the $50, and I got myself on the plane. But let's see, don't be greedy. That's what Tagore says. Don't be greedy. Don't be lusty. They're very unattractive, right? They're very unattractive. When you grow old, what kind of old person do you want to be? You want to be a friendly old man who's dressed in goofy clothes and doesn't care what he looks like, but does his best and enjoys living, does crazy things, and is always there for the grandkids, right? That's what you want to be when you get old. You want to be the source of love for the young. You want to show them what you've learned in life, that it's beautiful to love, it's beautiful to care, it's beautiful to make beautiful. That's what you want. You don't want to be an old man who's running after, young people, who's trying to pick up on young men, young women everywhere all the time, whose aim is his own pleasure. It gets, that kind of behavior gets more and more and more vile as you get older. Why is that? Because all of us intuitively know that age should be teaching you to know better. Right? That age should have taken your mind off of those things as you watched your body decay. You should have gotten the message, right? You should have gotten the message. That's why those things look more vile in the old than they do in the young, because there's a knowledge. No, we should be transcending these things. We should be moving beyond these things. And so this is the message of this chapter for us. This is what it's trying to teach us. All right, chapter 55 on the corruption of nature and the power of God's grace. The disciple, O Lord, my God, you have made me in your own image and likeness. Grant me this grace which you have shown me to be so great and so necessary for my salvation, to overcome my corrupt nature, which drags me down to sin and the loss of my soul. In my flesh, I see the law of sin opposing the law of my mind, leading me into bondage, so that I incline more and more to giving in to my sensual inclinations. Nor am I able to resist these passions unless your holy grace comes to my aid, infusing its fervor into my heart. Right? So he's got that emphasis there on grace again, like we were talking earlier. That's why that works. That you don't stand in the vice and scream about it and try and overcome it and try and fight it. You try and get out of the situation. You turn your back on it. You just cut the conversation off in mid-sentence. You just cut it off. There's nothing to be talked about as far as that argument goes. You turn to the beloved. You go down in front of them, lay down, and you say, help. I take refuge in you. It's a verb. I take refuge, which means I'm keeping my attention in this direction. I'm sitting here. I'm not going to go out there and fight anymore. I'm not even going to look out there. I'm not even going to acknowledge that there's a fight out there. I'm taking refuge. I'm taking refuge. I'm taking refuge in there. In my flesh, I see the law of sin, right? And sin, don't be sensitive about that word. Sin is just avidya. Those things that take us into the multiplicity, those things that take us into the body-mind space. It's the service of body-mind. That's all that sin is. It's serving the body-mind and forgetting the divine self. In my flesh, I see the law of sin opposing the law of my mind, leading me into bondage, so that I incline more toward giving in to my sensual inclinations. Nor am I able to resist these passions unless your holy grace comes to my aid, infusing its fervor into my heart. In order to overcome nature, I need your grace in great abundance. For this nature of ours is ever prone to evil, even from its youth. For it was defiled by sin through the first man, Adam, and the penalty of that stain has descended upon all of humankind. Yes, we are all identified with body. We are all trying to fulfill ourselves through the senses. We're all trying to become like God, but in the ego sense, be like God, but still be separate, so that we can enjoy that power, so that we can enjoy that bigness. Right? That's the world, the fallen world. That's what it is. But it's because we don't know better. It's because we've forgotten. We're lost in this world, and this is why God is compassionate, because he sees the potential. He sees the image of his own divine nature within you, and that is his love for you. That is the cause for his love. If you need to assign it a cause, it is always in that grace that God moves and has his being, as it were. And for us to come to understand that has always been our own as well. And through surrender, through letting go, we touch these things. So let's stop there for this evening.